Okay, thanks. I actually had talked in some of the district consultants' office hour meetings that they did over the past couple of months about the annual survey, and I had a slideshow that I showed them, and part of that was the youth services counts that we're adding this year to the annual survey. So I thought I'd just share that with you so you could see what we're going to do. All right, so I had done this kind of presentation for the other survey questions, but I started off with the programming questions, so that's an easy start here. So I'm just going to jump right into that. Uh, Clearly, this is, well, actually last year was an unusual year, and we wanted to try to account for the variety of new programming that libraries were doing. So what I wanted to show here is both the federal questions that are asked by IMLS, which is our federal agency, and who, by the way, manages the annual survey that we do every year. They're the main agency that handles that nationally. So we're actually doing this to provide them with the information and basically required to do that. So they had some questions that they wanted to add this year, and I also have some that we're going to add at the state level, which we have that option. So as you can see here, the first is just a yes/no question about whether or not your library provides live virtual programs. And basically, a live virtual program is a program that you do online with a staff member present, or it's also possible that you're maybe working with another agency that's providing the service. But it's basically an online program that meets our regular definition of a program. Basically, what we're doing now is a live virtual program. So people need to be present. I'm using air quotes. They need to be present, and there needs to be a person basically managing things. So we are going to count that, much like we do our other normal in-person programs. So that in-person program count is not going to change. We're still going to ask for those. But then we're going to add this range of questions. Like number 2, how many live virtual programs did you provide? So we're going to want to know how many of these live virtual things you're doing. And as with the in-person programs, we'll want to know how many you do for kids, young adults, and adults and family. Again, those age categories are based on who the program is geared for. So if you do a story time that's for 5-year-olds, you would consider that a kids program, even though you've got, you know, adults or older siblings, babysitters, whatever with them, that's considered a kids program. You count everybody in the room that's attending, and that's how you would get that attendance. I know with these virtual programs, a lot of these services, you know, you can get a statistical count of, well, let me skip that for now. But anyways, we'll just want the number of programs that you offered in each of those categories. Then what I was going to kind of get into here is with the attendance. We'll also want to count attendance for that. And I know that a lot of these services like Facebook Live or whatever, they only give you a count of the number of like computers that are connected in. So you don't necessarily know, like I could be, you know, I could be linked in here, but I might also have 3 kids with me and an adult or whatever. And you wouldn't necessarily know that by just doing a statistical analysis that the company was providing. So we do suggest that you would ask your attendees to let you know how many people you have with you. So there's a couple different ways you can count. Either you can just count the number of unique or peak live views, or you can actually ask who's in the room with you to get maybe a better count. Because of the way, you know, this stuff is being counted, I fully expect all our accounts are going to be kind of low this year, since this is kind of the first time that we've done this. So I just think everybody has to be aware of that counts are low. I kind of see these as kind of a rough estimate, and that's okay. I mean, we're really just trying to get an idea of what libraries are doing. I do want to maybe dispel maybe a misconception that I've heard from some libraries that if they provide a fewer number of programs this year, that they're somehow going to be penalized for that, that they'll have their accreditation affected, or they'll have their state funding reduced or something like that. I've actually had a couple questions about that. And there's nowhere that we base any kind of funding or service provision or anything like that on the number of programs that are provided. We want to know how much you're doing there, but that doesn't really affect you if the numbers go down. For accreditation purposes, all we really care about is that you're providing programs. How you do that is up to you. How much you do it is based on your community and how much they need. So just, maybe as a point of relief, you don't have to worry if your numbers are down this year. It's not like we're going to come down and close your library because you're down a little. If anything, I mean, I think we're happy that libraries are trying to provide this programming in alternate ways, that that the technology is advanced to a point where we can do this kind of thing. If we'd had this happen 10 years ago, I don't think we would, libraries wouldn't be able to provide this kind of service. So I think it's great. I want to, encourage people to do this. Count what you have. Don't worry about the numbers, though. It's just really, as long as you're doing something, that's really all we care about.
And Scott,
yeah.
So one of the questions we got that has continued to come up, and I thought you and I could both kind of talk about this one, was people are really, they want to know how to count the, as you know, the take and make bags were a huge thing. I think you probably have heard about that, and you certainly heard me talk about it. The idea that they put together a craft or an activity or a science project or something in a bag and then they handed them out. And I think people want to know how they should count those. And I think that that ties back to how you and I kind of eliminated those questions from the survey.
Yeah.
So my answer to that, and you can kind of supplement with that, is like, you don't have to worry about including that on this annual survey. If anything, I might put together a specific summer survey like I did last year, but that's not the kind of information. We didn't want you to have to feel like you were answering 27,000 minute questions. You should just count that as part of your program, and did you offer a program? So does that, Scott, do you want to kind of...
I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. To me, those are kind of like any, if you do a program in the library, a craft program, usually you're supplying that stuff anyways. So that's just part of the kind of the cost of doing business as far as the program's concerned. So certainly not, you wouldn't count that kind of stuff on the survey. We don't really have a way of tracking that type of thing. If it was a kit that maybe you were checking out, I mean, possibly counted as circulation, but if you're just giving them away with the understanding that it wouldn't be returned, then there's really not a good way to count that kind of stuff.
And also that's what we kind of talk about too, about using that to tell your local story. So
Definitely.
That's the kind of number you want to report to your board, or that's the kind of number you want to report to your director. But we don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to account for it on the state library on my annual survey. Like, that is really more of the metric about like presenting an actual facilitated program, which is what the recording thing addresses. And so if I send out a survey like I did last year, and some of you might remember that I sent out a separate like Survey Monkey survey that asked things about like, how many programs did you provide for 0 to 6-year-olds? How many programs did you provide for teens? If I send something out that's more of that, it would have questions like that about now. But we basically didn't want you to get bogged down in, I handed out 27 bags week 1 and 32 bags week 2 in the annual survey.
And, I think the other thing we have to take into account here is the survey is a tool that asks um, fairly broad questions because the main point of the survey is to compare between states and from year to year, and to try to get a national picture. And some of this stuff, like those bags, might be, it's definitely important that you're doing that, and it's important that you're counting it, but it's probably not something that, if we counted it on the survey, how useful is that when you look at things nationally? And even from one library to the next, I mean, one library may be doing that, but the library down the road in another town that's exactly the same size, they may decide to do something totally different. So, I mean, you're counting it, but you're not necessarily using it to compare. And that's kind of one of the main purposes of this survey. Um, so yeah, right now we're not to say that we wouldn't in the future for some reason, but right now that's not something we're looking at. But again, like what Angie said, definitely count it for yourself. Use that when you're talking to your funding agency or your director, whoever. That kind of stuff is really important for you at the local level. So I would never discourage you from keeping statistics of anything that's not on the survey. I mean, some of that stuff is really important. It's not maybe as important when you look at it through the national lens at this stuff. So this other slide I have up, you've probably all had a chance to read through. This is the other programming kind of thing that a lot of libraries are doing. So you do your live virtual program, and then you record it, and then you make it available on Facebook Live or whatever service you're using, so people can get to it at kind of on their own time. You don't have anybody kind of managing that presentation at that point. They're just basically watching a recording. That type of thing does not meet our definition of a program on the survey, the way the definition currently is. But we still think this is something, it was a fairly major service this year, so it's something that we wanted to try to get a count of to see what people were doing. So we are adding a section of questions on the survey to cover that as well, the recordings of program content. Again, in those same categories, kids, YA, family, adult, number of programs, number of attendees. And that, in that case, it would just be the number of basically the unique views. Or in Facebook, I think they call it 1 minute views. If you get into this stuff and you have a vendor that, the way they report their statistics aren't 100% clear, it'd probably help to send the report to me and I can look it over, and I could usually, pick out what I think we should be counting. And what I plan to do here over the course of the next month or so, as I hear from libraries, I'm going to be posting this information on our website. So if I hear from one library that they're using, you know, a product that I haven't heard of before, I can post it on our website, and that way other people that are using that can find out how to report it. So this will be a separate count. This is not going to be added into the programming count, but we will still be counting these. So there'll be two separate counts. There'll be programs, which include virtual programs, and then we'll have a second count that will be recordings of those programs. So that's really all I had as far as slides go.
And then I thought you might want to come in with this again. If you open the chat, you can see kind of their idea is like, so that they didn't provide live programs online. Their concern is, did they still provide a summer program? And if you kind of see what I answered in the chat, that the only thing the annual survey we want to know is that you did provide a program. And so we want you to say, yes, I provided the program, and not worry about, like, they took 45 bags, so I'm going to put that 45 people participated in the program. Does that, so like one of the ways that I've been trying to kind of put it in like youth services context is like, even if the activity bag had 5 science experiments and a free book and all of that, that is the equivalent of you handing out a reading log to a kid. It's not the equivalent of in the regular times, in the before times when you had a program and they came into the library. And that's what the recorded questions are trying to capture. Like how many people, if you recorded a story time and you presented the story time, how many people went to that? And that's kind of what those national questions are trying to get at. Scott, am I doing a bad job explaining?
No, I think the one change I would make to your statement is it's actually an accreditation requirement that libraries do summer programming.
That's what I see. I get those words mixed up.
Yes, you're not alone on that.
Yes.
So, so as far as accreditation goes, we do require that libraries do, if they're going to participate in the program, it's a voluntary program. I have to repeat that. But if they want to participate in the program, we basically expect libraries to do programming, and then we also expect them to do summer programming. And we don't, in none of our standards do we say you must provide X number of programs. You must provide, a minimum of 1 program to meet the standard. I guess that's how it's numerically satisfied. With that said, this past year and probably this coming year, depending on how things go, we will more than likely waive the summer reading program requirement. Actually, not probably. We will waive that requirement for this past year. And I mean, I'm expecting the regular programming standard to not be a problem because we had programming going on, this past year from July to March or whenever. So I'm not too worried about that. But the summer reading program.
And I think it's also okay for you can say we didn't do it. I was a 1-person library. There wasn't happening. I'm sorry. But also you can count the program as that exactly what we set up before, that we did bags and counted those who registered and picked up bags. Then when they came up to pick up the bags, we counted them for attendance. Okay, so you offered a program. So I think that too, like that is, then the answer is yes, we offered a program. It didn't look like it did in the past. They didn't come into the library. I didn't put on the survey the live online part, but we still offered a program. So I think that is also the kind of distinction.
For accreditation and then for the annual survey, what I've done for those summer reading programs in the past is I do think that we want to count any programs. So if you do reading programs or whatever during the summer reading program, then we do want to get some count of attendance. And sometimes with those reading log things, it's hard to tell exactly who's attending, but I mean, you are still providing a program, so we usually try to figure out a way to count those if we can. It's maybe 1 program with 40 attendees or something like that, but I do think it can be helpful to count those programs. And yeah, definitely this year it's going to look different, but I don't worry about that. If it looks different, it's still a program. So if you're not quite sure about how to count stuff, the easiest way to deal with that is to contact me. I think what we've done with some of the reading programs that use reading logs in the past is we'd say maybe, sometimes we'd say count the number of logs returned, but even then, sometimes you get people turning in more than 1. Which was where, when we did ask for the number of registrations, you could kind of base it on that, but even then, that number tended to be kind of an estimate.
Yeah, and it skews.
If you knew you had 20 kids doing it, then I think it's a fair bet to go with 20.
And so now Heather wants to know, when will the survey be available to fill out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I could give you a definite answer on that. Like everything else, we're behind the company that we contract out to do the survey has been doing one furlough week a month. And so they're way behind. We're still working on it. I was saying end of August.
The
That's
end of
probably
August
on.
is like next week.
I know it's a week from today, I think. So that's pretty unrealistic. I mean, it's still possible. Maybe mid-September's more realistic at this point.
Um,
No
so,
guarantees.
but we're working on it. Not
Yes.
us technically, but it's being worked on.
We're not,
So,
don't worry, I'm not forgetting about it. It's just it's all gonna be everything's gonna be later. And if I think it's pushed out into September, then we'll definitely adjust the due date.
yeah.
So I'm still gonna try to give you about 2 months, at least 2 months
Right.
to
We
do it.
won't give it, we won't have it come out on the 1st of October and be like, and it's due at the end of the month. So get on it. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
so everybody too, this is the time, if you have mic access, if you want to unmute and ask a question, if you want to type something in the chat, if you have a question or a clarifying question, or all we have done is ended up confusing you, which I totally understand how confusing and overwhelming this is. And I totally understand how kind of depressing this summer's stats are. But if you have mic access and you want to unmute to ask something, you can feel free to do that now. You can also type it in the chat. I will also say, for those of you that subscribe to the newsletter, I worked in this whole kind of overview about how to think about statistics, and how to approach them and how to consider them this year. And I hope some of that was helpful. And what Scott and I both want to really look at is really to use them to tell your local story, and to say the kits and the that's the story that you're telling your partners, that you're telling your community of how you continued to show up for them. So, so I see someone type something. I think Scott's typing an answer, I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I would count that I would count that as a program. And if you have an idea of how many people, how many individual people, so if you had, you know, 60 bags, but only 10 people participated, then we'd want basically a attendance of 10 in that case, is how I would do that.
So for the recording friends, Tony said, we did 9 weeks of grab bags. Do we use that as 9 programs or just one as the summer reading? And Scott said, I would count that as one program. I would say also too, though, and this is your own local thing, if you have a family and they took 5 bags, you should count 5 kids. It's like,
Yeah, if
you
you're
should count
thinking that,
individuals who took, like,
yes,
yeah, you should
count
count individuals.
which is a little different from the way we normally count programs, but because of the way this is kind of set up, I think we probably just want individuals rather than attendance.
Yep, the individual contact you made, I think. Yeah.
Normally for program attendance, if you had 5 programs that met, once, say you had 5 programs that met once a week, or how do I want to say it? If you had 5 programs and you had the same 10 people come to each of those 5 programs, normally for attendance, we would count that as 50. But in this case, because you're not like having the program in your building and you're just passing out bags, you don't know if you've got repeats or whatever. So in these cases, I think you'd be better just counting the number of individual participants. We could just not count attendance at all with these, but I would like to get some idea of, what you're doing here.
And I also think it is, I think it's gonna, a lot of libraries did it. So it's gonna be,
Yeah.
It's gonna be kind of a metric that a lot of them are gonna be using. So that element as well. Does anybody have questions about I know that this has come up a lot, the recorded programs, the live programs, the how we count views, kind of what information we're collecting. I know that that's been a repeated issue. So if anybody has any questions about that, or any other questions in general about the annual survey, or even if we can just continue to reassure you that we are not expecting it to look like every other year.
No, and to be honest with you, if it looked like every other year, I'd be suspicious because I think, nationally we expect all the numbers to be low.
Mhm.
Um, Especially, we had libraries that have been closed for, 2, maybe 3 months or longer. If your circulation or your programming count was the same as it was last year, I'd ask you why, because that seems odd to me. Um, we shouldn't try to make the numbers look better. We should try to make these numbers look as accurate as we can. Like I said, we're not paying you based on this kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah,
like that we should, and I think that's a good thing to kind of reassure ourselves with, that we're not trying to make the numbers look better. Like
right.
we're not
No,
trying to like massage this.
no. Massage it so that they're correct.
Yeah.
I'm all about reporting it as accurately as you can. And, we want to make sure that 10, 15, 20 years from now, when we look back at, 2020, we'll definitely see that, this has had a major impact on library services. Um, Heather makes a point about curbside. That's another question that we'll be asking. That's a good point for curbside stuff. We'll ask you whether or not you do it, um, but we're not asking any quantitative questions with curbside other than, if you check things out, you should still counter the circulation, but we're not going to ask you specifically how many things you checked out on curbside.
And actually that's a good follow-up, that although that we are here for youth services and we've talked a lot about youth services, if you have other annual survey questions like that you want to ask Scott right now, now's a great time when we're all kind of hanging out together that you can do that. If you have a burning question about something else related to the survey, it does not have to just be about youth services and programming for youth services. Now's another good time to pop something in there about curbside, or Scott, now's also a good time for if there's something that you've got a lot of frequently asked questions about that you could answer here. It doesn't just have to be youth services. I also know many of you don't just do youth services, you do lots of things at your library. So,
Yeah, I mean, actually, those programming questions is probably the most frequent one.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm seeing another question about when the survey was ready, and I'll fall back on my other answer that uh, maybe end of month, but more likely mid-September. Um,
Which will be here before we know it.
yeah, it's coming quickly. Fortunately, we're getting close.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if we open the survey late, then we'll also push the due date back.
And I still am debating internally whether I'm going to send out a youth services specific survey like I did last year. And if I do, it too will have different information, but I right now I'm debating whether that's something that's really worth it or whether I want to put another thing on your plate right now. So, that's kind of up in the air too, but that if that happens, it would also be low pressure and it wouldn't have like 47 questions. And I did that last year as kind of a test of something that Scott and I worked out, where we dropped some things from the annual survey and I kind of moved them to my own survey. But if we do that, um, so just for that.
I see Christine's question about door count, and you only count door count when your library is open. And if your facility is closed to the point where you're only providing curbside, or, they basically can only do pickup of stuff, we don't really count you as open at that point, so you would not count that as door count. So if they're coming into your foyer to pick up holds or whatever, but that's all, you're not open at that point. And that's a good question. We tried to clarify the hours open question. This is something, again, that our federal agency has specified, that if you're not fully open to the public, where I can walk into your library, go to the shelf, pick out a book, go and sit down, read it or whatever, or come to the reference desk and ask a question, or use the bathrooms, or, well, maybe that's going too far, but if you're basically open for general services, then you're open. But if all you're doing is curbside or pickup kind of stuff, take out, then you wouldn't be counted as being open.
So some feedback from Bree from Clear Lake, which was the YS survey last year, because gave us good stats for encouragement when we talked up the SRP, which was the goal of it. And so that is why I'm considering bringing it back. But again, I want to reassure you, if I brought it back, it would be as it was last year. It would be optional. It was optional only. As you know, I think about, I don't know how many, I can't remember, a couple, maybe like 200 responded, maybe 200 libraries responded. First of all, it would be totally optional. And second of all, I would work to make it low pressure, because the last thing we want to do is make you feel like you have 800 more questions to answer. So I appreciate that feedback. For those of you that came to the presentation I did, remember in the before when I used to travel around and do presentations? Those were the good old days. I think about them fondly. They were the last thing I did. But for those of you that came to the summer library program in-person presentations, I had the stats that I got from those documents, and I think so much of statistics, so much of it, we really want to encourage you, especially this year, to use it to tell your story. And I want to also encourage you to think about statistics as asking your community for feedback. So if you have not taken the time to ask them, what did you think about the bags? Can you, any piece of that community feedback, that's really what you're looking for this year. And that's really important. And we don't want you to feel like that doesn't matter, or if there's not a box for it, it doesn't count. So that is all tied back to, again, I hope you all read in the newsletter, my you can do it, don't worry about your numbers, you're more than numbers cheer. If you got the July newsletter, July Youth Services newsletter, there's a whole section on it, which Scott also looked over before I sent it out, just to make sure I wasn't telling you any randomly, wildly fake things, to look on that too. So other burning questions? Scott, are there other things you want to address before people get it, or thoughts?
I think, as far as the survey is concerned, I think we've covered it pretty well. For accreditation, again, I just, want to put people's minds at ease that some of these questions that we've got on accreditation that are kind of service related like this will either modify or waive them for whatever happened last year.
For sure.
So we definitely, have that in mind. There are certain things like, we require that libraries be open a certain number of hours, and, that's unrealistic when you have to be closed for 2 or 3 months because of COVID. So we're definitely going to take that into account when we look at this stuff. And I think we're also going to be looking at standards in the next year or so, just to make sure they're still realistic. That, we also know that a lot of libraries are going to go through some major budget problems, and that we may need to change things a bit to make it more realistic for libraries. The goal is to not make people fail at accreditation. We want you all to succeed, and we want to make you better. So
and we don't want you to feel like it's, and that is tied to the survey, that element of the accreditation in the survey. We don't want you to feel like it's like punishment, like or like that we're asking this just because we want you to jump through hoops. We want you to be able to see the tangible results of why we're asking this and how it can have real world benefits for you. So that,
and in my mind, accreditation it's a list of best practices. It's what we think libraries can do to make themselves better. So we've had this kind of major, paradigm shift in the world, and we may need to rethink what we expected 5 years ago may be totally unrealistic in today's world. So we're definitely going to be looking at that in the next probably year or so.
And this part, as Scott has mentioned 8,000 times, so I'll mention 8,001. And if you have questions once you get into it, or if you get confused, or if you want to follow up, or if you have a really specific question about it, you can 100% reach out to Scott and he will answer your question, as he does for me every time I email him and I'm like, can you explain to me what a tier is for the 8,000th time? Can you explain to me what accreditation is for the 9,000th time? He will be happy to help you with your specific question, whether it is youth services related or not. Isn't
Yes,
that
I will.
right? Yes.
Yes, that is right. I
Also,
will, of course.
that's a real
That's,
thing too. Eventually he was like, did you know there's a website where we have all the tiers of the libraries listed? And I was like, oh my gosh, this would save so much time. It's fine. It's fine. And Heather, I agree totally. So Heather says we're
yeah.
providing a service even though we're not open fully and only offering limited things. I agree. All of our patrons, says patrons love curbside. I agree. And I think all of you maybe have had that experience with the bags, that people are so grateful to have something, that it's not the same as having kids come into the library and have a program, but it is something that you can offer them as a source of recreation, as a source of, this is what we're doing for you. This is what we put together as subject experts. I think all of you should continue to feel that way. And also those are the stories that your community is looking for about why the library is an asset. And I think that is just as important. And maybe I hope now that you've realized it might even be more important than you got 800 people to come to see a magician. Because it's cool that you got 800 people to see a magician, but that you got 40 kids to take a bag that they could color create and find some solace and entertainment and relief in these times is a huge achievement. And I want you to be as equally proud of that as you are about the times when you have violated the fire code in your library because so many people have been inside it. And that's the story that stats can never fully reflect. So.
And that will be, that will be one of the questions we'll be asking this year, is whether or not you are providing curbside. So we do want to know that from libraries if they're providing that service. We just didn't, the more we looked at it, we thought it'd be fairly difficult for all the libraries to get a really good count of like how many curbside specific services do they provide, that type of thing.
And Scott, that's kind of what you were talking to about consistency across the board. So like we didn't want like this library A says this, library B says this, library. We wanted to get like a consistent, even if it was broad, we wanted it to be across the board. And not just in Iowa, but in other states asking the same questions. So that's the other way to think about it, that it's not just like one or versus, it's this broad spectrum of what services were provided in this period.
But if you do have that count, if you do have the count, I mean, if you know how many people you serve through curbside, you've got that number, shout it to the world back home. I mean, it's important for your city or your county or your director or whoever to know what's going on there. So yeah, I'm not trying to, I won't discourage anybody from collecting statistics that you think are important. They just may or not fit into our current annual survey. And if curbside, if that service changes drastically and it becomes this really important library service, even once things kind of get back to normal or new normal, we may ask more in-depth questions about that depending on the state of the program. But for right now, we just think, it's important to know that libraries are doing it. You still want to make sure you count any circulation that you're doing. That's still really important. If you're checking books out through curbside, count it as circulation. So that's the way you're going to, find out that you're doing a service there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, does anybody else have burning? I know the step tracker could count the steps I made during curbside. Some people have been telling me, I've seen that so repeated across the board. So many people are talking about how much walking they're doing. Somebody was like, I walk like 5 miles a day just doing curbside. So yeah. So does anybody else have any other burning surveys, statistics, questions, or anything else that Scott can answer or that I can answer? Do you want to ask the other people here in the chat, hey, how did it go at your library? Hey, now is your time to do that. We have, this has been about 45 minutes, so I don't think there's anything wrong with us ending a little short of an hour, but I do want to make sure that you have a chance to do this. For those of you that came last Monday, or if you made it last Monday, we had my kind of office hours and they were a big hit, so I do want to tell you, and you guys can be like the first to find out, I am going to bring back once a month office hours, but I'm coming up with like a catchy name for them that's like going to involve popcorn, because you know how I love to brand things. So, but I am going to bring back reoccurring office hours once a month where we can just get together and talk about things. So in this last time together, if you have things you want to ask each other, not just me and Scott, if you have things you want to ask each other, hey, have you tried this? Hey, what are you doing? Or if you have something you want to, now you have the market, you can corner me and Scott and ask us while you have us right here. Oh, Scott, this is a good one. And by good one, I mean, it's about Storywalk, Scott.
Yeah, that is, we do not currently count that as a program.
And I know people have struggled with like, how do they get feedback from it? One of my friends who has a library in Illinois, who works at a library in Illinois, she was like, we put a QR code at the end that was like, hey, when you get done with this, scan the QR code and tell us what you thought. And how many people do you think have done it in 1 year? Nobody
Yeah.
did it. So Bree asked, I assume Storywalk statistics are like grab and go bags. We provide the service, but the numbers are not recorded.
Basically, yes.
Because it's hard to, it's so hard to.
It's hard to,
Mm-hmm.
hard to count that. It's a good point though. What's the passive programs? That's the term I want. These kind of passive programs that are provided, this is something that comes up every year. There's a person that does my job basically in each state, and we get together every year around the country. We have a meeting where we all gather together and talk about the annual survey for 3 days, if you can imagine that.
True story, everyone.
It is a true story. And that is when we talk about what questions should be added or removed from the federal survey. And I'd say the past probably 4 or 5 years, passive programming comes up as, you know, something, yeah, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. It's never really been seriously considered to add in. But this last year, we had a kind of a major overhaul to this process. And we now have a committee that's working on programming. And one of the things that they want to address is how do we count these kinds of passive programming events. And I think, you know, it might still take a couple of years because we are dealing with the federal government here, but maybe in a couple of years, we're going to see some questions on the survey that can count this kind of stuff because, you know, the library is doing something.
Yeah.
You're providing some kind of service. The problem has been, how do we consistently count, especially the attendance, so that, you know, we can compare library A to B or from 1 year to the next. How can we compare this stuff? Because that's kind of what we're looking at the federal level. So I would say be patient, and maybe in a couple of years we'll see this. But for right now, we're not really able to count that.
And Storywalks are even harder because they're not even coming into the building. Like if you put out an activity sheet during the week, you could say, oh, 20 people took the activity sheet, but Storywalks are even more difficult because they're not passing through. Oftentimes they're not passing through the building, so.
Right. Well, and it could also account for things like the grab and go bags, because that is really, in some ways, it could be seen as a passive program. So yeah, I mean, it's something that we've struggled with for years.
Well, no use services librarians want you to do it. They love it. We love passive programming.
We like it just the way it is.
Yeah, well, tell the other consultants youth services librarians want it because youth services librarians love passive programs. So there's books about it. So
no, we know, and some of the people that come to this meeting are youth services librarians. They do like everything.
So just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
I see as a broad question, Joni asked if anyone is doing activities for homeschool students or virtual students through the school district. We kind of talked about, I talked about homeschooling a little bit. I created that document for those of you that haven't seen it. I have a resource for that. If I don't know what kind of things you might have created. I think so much about the schools is kind of up in the air. So some schools might be moving online or not. But you should know that I'm looking about that, and I'm hoping to do maybe a Pop YS or something about working with homeschool communities. I really encourage all of you to, at the very least, reach out on your social media, on your newsletters, on your letter in the newspaper, put a sign up in your window and say, I would love to talk to homeschoolers, try to connect with your homeschool community. And I just linked in the chat, I put a link to the spreadsheet that I linked, and a lot of the Iowa specific resources have regional groups. So you might check in that document and see if there's a regional homeschooling co-op or something that's working in close to where you are, and reach out to them and be like, hey, I just want to throw that out there to you, that we're a resource. So, and I'm sure we'll hear more of that as the year goes on. So, Scott, thank you for taking time, even though literally the roof has been ripped off of your house, to join us today. We are super thankful and super appreciative. And I know that this made some people feel better. I hope that it made some of you feel better. And I hope that it gave some of you a little step forward and reassurance and reminder of where we are. And as per usual, feel free to reach out to me or Scott if you have more questions, not just about the annual survey. You can ask Scott about accreditation, not me. I don't not help with you that. And I hope, at the very least, as per usual, the whole goal of all of these is that you feel less alone and you feel less like, oh my gosh, I'm the only person that happened to. Because what I really want to kind of remove is that I know so many of us are feeling that right now, that isolation. And so I hope, if anything, it kind of addressed that. And it also let you know that we are thinking about it and we are trying to address it as well. So if you have follow-up questions, please get in touch with either one of us. I am the recording of this, I'm going to find a place to post it. I'll talk to Sam Bowers about that. We might just put it up on the State Library's YouTube. And then Scott, you could also reference it as well. You could send people to it. Thank you so much for coming. Stay tuned. You'll hear more from me soon about other stuff we have going on. And everybody, put your masks on, wash your hands, get homeowners insurance for in case a trampoline comes through your roof. I don't know.
As preparation for our work here, my wife actually went out and bought some extra masks for the work crew. And actually one of them showed up without his mask today, so he got one.
I leave them out. When we order deliveries, I leave out a mask for the delivery people, and sometimes they take them and sometimes they don't. But I leave out a mask along with the tip. I'm like, take this mask.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you know, they're not that expensive.
Thank you everyone for coming. I hope this answered some of your questions, but I also hope it got you thinking. Remember that statistics are just one way to tell the story of the difference you make in your community, which is large. And what you have done in these past 5 months has been truly, literally unheard of. And I'm so proud of all of you, and your communities are so lucky to have you. And know that you are not alone and that you are being seen and valued in this work, even if it sometimes doesn't feel that way. And we certainly at the State Library are so grateful to you. So wash your hands, put your masks on, keep trying your best, take it one day at a time. It's all we can do. And please reach out to us if we can help you answer any questions. Thanks everybody. And thank you, Scott, so much. And please get out of your house, and I'll be sending you really good thoughts. So.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for attending, everyone. I appreciate it.
Bye everybody. Thanks.